I don't know exactly when the sky decided it was done being patient with Corden Flats, but I know it was a Tuesday in late September, because I just finished my survey lines on the east parcel and come up to the Ridge Road when I saw the green. Not the green of a storm coming, the green of a storm that has already made up its mind. I'm Levi Prout. I spent 31 years as county surveyor for the Corden Flats corridor, and in that time I watched the high plain do things to people that no man ought to witness twice. I've seen droughts turn good ranchers into shadows of themselves. I've seen floods take everything a family built in a single night. But the tornadoes, those I've seen take people's whole idea of what their life was, spin it up into the air, and drop it somewhere unrecognizable. What I'm about to tell you happened the autumn of 1887, and if you want to understand it, you have to understand Della Prine first, because everything that followed began with her. Della ran Prine Station on the southeast edge of the Corden Flats telegraph corridor. The station had been her husband Amos's operation, a relay post, a rough livery, and a small dry goods trade that served the cattlemen and freighters moving through the valley. Amos died of a fever 3 winters before, and Della had kept every part of it running alone since. She had a son, Fen, who was 9 years old that September, a serious boy who sorted freight manifests with the gravity of a territorial judge and could tap out a telegram faster than men twice his age. I lived across the main road from Prine Station, close enough to see her lamp in the window when I woke in the night, and I watched Della run that station the way a woman runs something she has decided will not fall. Not with bravado, not with noise, with a quiet, particular stubbornness that I'd come to respect the way you respect good ironwork. You don't admire it so much as rely on it. She was 34 that year, dark-haired, composed, with hands that were always doing something, sorting freight, tapping the key, mending tack, tallying the ledger. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for more than the situation offered, and she didn't pretend the situation was better than it was, which I'd come to understand was a kind of courage all its own. The morning of the storm, she'd been at the key since before dawn. There was a cattle shipment moving up from the delving operation, and the relay confirmations had been slow. Fen was stacking crates in the livery when I crossed the road to borrow her freight scale, and she had the look of a woman who'd been working since before the rest of the world thought to begin. "Sky's odd," I told her. She looked up from the ledger and glanced out the south window. "Been odd since yesterday. Pressure's been dropping since noon. You want Fen to come stay at my place today." She looked at him through the livery doorway, 9 years old, moving crates with a boy's serious concentration, and then she looked back at me. "We'll be fine, Levi." That was the last time I spoke to her before the sky came down. I've tried to explain the green to people who haven't seen it, and I always come up short. It's not the color of anything natural. It's the color of the atmosphere deciding it's finished with whatever arrangement it had with the ground. A yellowish, sickly green that makes every building, every fence post, every blade of grass look wrong, like the world has been replaced with a painting of itself, and the painter was in a hurry and used the wrong colors. I was coming back down the Ridge Road when I saw it rotating. Not a funnel yet, just a wall of dark moving too fast and too low, with a sound that started as a murmur and became a roar so total it stopped being a sound and became a weight. I turned my horse north toward the Kettler barn and rode hard, and I didn't look back, because there was nothing useful in looking back. The tornado system that hit Corden Flats on that Tuesday was not one storm. It was 3, moving in a line, each one feeding off the last. The first took the Kettler outbuildings and a quarter-mile of fence line. The second tracked northeast and hit the Brandel grain operation. The third, the one that mattered, the one that gives me trouble at night still, came straight down the telegraph corridor and hit Prine Station Square. I found out later what happened to Della because she told me, in pieces, over the weeks that followed, and because Holt Casson told me the part she didn't. She heard the roar about 30 seconds before it hit. Later she said it wasn't fear she felt. It was the strange clarity that comes when a situation announces itself plainly, and you can either act or not act. She ran for Fenn. He was still in the livery when she got to the doorway, and she crossed the distance at a run and took him by the arm and pulled him toward the root cellar in the station floor. The trap door was in the back corner, beneath a rug and a crate of salted beef. She moved the crate with one hand and had the door up in 3 seconds, and she had Fenn down the ladder and herself after him, just as the walls of the livery shuddered, and the world above them became noise. The root cellar was 4 feet deep and covered. It held. The station above it did not. When the roaring stopped, and it stopped as suddenly as it had begun, which is one of the cruelest things about tornadoes, that quiet after, Della climbed the ladder and pushed the trap door, and it moved about 3 inches before it hit something solid and stopped. She pushed again. It gave another inch. Fenn was below her on the ladder, and she could hear him breathing fast, controlled, the way he breathed when he was working something out. "Are you hurt?" she asked him. "No, ma'am." "Are you?" "Not yet," she said, which was honest. She got her shoulder under the trap door and heaved, and this time it moved 6, 8 inches, enough for her to see gray daylight and the underside of a collapsed wall beam. The cellar hadn't been buried, but the station floor above it had caved in on one side, and the beam was pinning the door at an angle. She could see sky through a gap where the south wall had been. She worked the door back and forth in the gap it had, widening it by inches until she could get an arm through. Fenn was below her, quiet, patient, waiting. It took her 20 minutes to clear enough debris to get the door open. She cut her forearm on a piece of tin roofing and didn't notice until they were out. Fenn climbed up after her and stood in the wreckage of what had been their home and their livelihood, and he looked at it the way a 9-year-old boy looks at something that has removed all the choices, with a face that is trying to decide whether to cry or to start solving. He started solving. "The telegraph wire's down," he said. "We can't send for help." "No," she agreed. "Is Mr. Levi's house?" She looked north across the road. "My place was standing. The roof had taken damage on the west side and my fence was down, but the walls were up." She exhaled once slowly. "His house is there," she said. "We'll get there." That was when Fenn stepped wrong on a piece of debris and fell, and his leg went through a gap in the floor wreckage, and she heard the sound his knee made and knew it was bad. She got him up and got his arm over her shoulders and started moving him toward the road. He didn't cry. He set his jaw the way Amos used to set his jaw, and he moved. They were halfway to the road when the rider came in from the south. Holt Casson was 53 years old when he rode into Corden Flats on the back end of that September storm. He was a cattle drover, had been one for going on 8 years by then, since the tornado of '79 had taken his ranch in Verrado County, and with it, his wife and his youngest daughter. I didn't know any of this when I saw him ride in. I only saw a big, road-worn man on a gray horse, coming in from the south at a walk, picking his way through debris in the road with the unhurried patience of a man who has been in trouble before and is not going to be hurried by it. Later I asked him why he'd come south. The storm had been moving northeast. His herd, what was left of it after the first 2 funnels had spooked it across the range, was scattered north. Every practical thing pointed him north. He said he didn't have a good answer for that. What he saw when he came around the bend in the road was a woman in a torn dress, her arm bleeding through her sleeve, carrying a boy with a bad leg toward a house across the road, in the wreckage of what had been a building. He came off the horse before it had fully stopped. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with hands that had worked rope and iron for 30 years, and a face that had been out in the weather so long it had settled into a permanent squint against the sun. He had gray in his beard and gray at his temples and eyes the color of a winter sky, And later Della told me that the first thing she thought when she saw him climb off that horse was that he looked like a man who had already been through his worst thing and survived it. And that was the most useful kind of person she could think of right now. "Let me take the boy," he said, "not a question." She looked at him for a moment, that particular look she had, the one that read a situation before she committed to a response. "Careful with the knee," she said, and stepped aside. He took Fen across his arms like a man who'd carried injured things before, gently, fully, with a sureness that kept the knee still, and carried him the rest of the way to my door, where I'd come out onto the porch when I heard the horse. I hadn't even seen them coming. I'd been in the back of the house checking the cellar hatch when the storm hit, and I'd come out after to find my west fence down and my porch railing gone and apparently neighbors arriving. "Levi," Della said. "Della, you're bleeding. The boy's knee is worse. Do you have?" "Get inside." We got Fen onto the settee, and the stranger set him down as carefully as if he were made of something that mattered, which he was. My wife Hedda had gone to her sister's in Aldenmere 2 weeks before, so the house was spare, but I had the medical kit from the wall and a good supply of spirits and bandage cloth, and Della had the knee wrapped and the boy dosed with willow bark tea before the stranger had finished tying his horse. He came inside without being asked, which is the kind of thing you either resent or accept, and I accepted it because he'd carried Fen across the yard, and his coat was wet through, and there was blood on his sleeve from somewhere. "You're hurt," I said. "Window glass somewhere on the road. It's nothing." "Sit down." He sat. He looked around my house with the eyes of a man taking inventory, what was solid, what was damaged, what could be worked with. Not afraid, not shaken, just assessing. "What's your name?" Della asked. She was still at Fen's knee, not looking up. "Cassin, Holt Cassin. I was moving cattle through the corridor when the first 2 funnels hit, lost most of the herd to the north." "I'm sorry," she said. "Cattle can be found." He said it simply, with no particular bitterness, and then he didn't say anything else for a while. I gave him coffee from the stove. He drank it without comment. Fen had gone quiet on the settee, not asleep, just still, the way boys go still when the pain settles into something manageable. Della cleaned her own arm efficiently, with the same attention she'd given the boy, and tied it off, and then she stood and looked out the south window toward the wreck of Prine Station. The silence in the room was not an uncomfortable one. It was the silence of people who have come through something together and are now, for the first time, still. "The station's gone," she said. "Not all of it," Holt said. She looked at him. "The cellar structure held. The east wall of the livery is up mostly. The south wall is down, but the framing posts are standing." He said this without preamble, as if he'd been studying it since he rode in. "The roof is the problem, and the telegraph line." "I know what the problem is," she said, not sharply, just evenly. "I wasn't doubting that. I was telling you what I saw." She looked at him again with that reading look, and something shifted in her face. Not warmth yet, but attention. "Can you ride?" she asked. "Yes." "The relay station at Gundel is 14 miles north. If the line is down between here and there, they'll have sent a rider south already. But if the line's up north of the storm path—" "I'll go in the morning," he said. "It'll be dark in 2 hours and the road'll be debris. I'll go at first light." She considered this. All right. He slept on my floor that night, under a wool blanket I gave him, and didn't complain about it. He rode north at first light, and came back by mid-morning with word that the relay station at Gundel had already sent for the circuit engineer, and that a repair crew would be through in 5 days. He also came back with a load of cedar planks he'd bought from the Kettler operation, paid for out of his own pocket, which I didn't know until Della found out later and tried to repay him, and he told her to stop. He spent the rest of that day on the roof framing of the east livery wall. I came out and helped where I could, but I'm a surveyor, not a carpenter, and my usefulness was limited. Holt worked the way certain men work, without wasted motion, without commentary, with a steadiness that was something close to relentless. By late afternoon he had the east wall shored, a temporary roof section rigged from salvaged tin and new cedar, and the livery usable enough to shelter the animals. Fenn watched from a chair Della had dragged into the livery doorway. His knee had been wrapped tight, and the surveyor's wisdom said he was to keep off it, which he resisted, but Della's wisdom was stronger. "How come you know how to do all that?" Fenn asked Holt at one point. Holt didn't look up from the nail he was setting. "Built a few things." "Did you ever build a whole ranch?" A pause, not a long one. "Yeah." "What happened to it?" Another pause. Della, who was behind Fenn sorting salvaged goods, went still. "A storm took it," Holt said. Fenn thought about this. "Like ours." "Like yours." "Was it just you, or did you have people?" Holt set the nail and drove it in 3 strokes, clean, without hurry. "I had people." Fenn nodded seriously. He seemed to understand, at 9 years old, that some questions have been answered completely, even when they haven't been answered fully. "I'm sorry," he said. Holt looked at him then, a straight, real look, the kind that costs something. "I know," he said. "Thank you, son." I watched that exchange from the far end of the livery, and I will tell you that it was the first crack I saw in Holt Cassin. Not a break, not a collapse, just a hairline, the kind that appears in something that has been under pressure for a long time and has not had anywhere to release it. Della saw it too. I could tell from the way she looked at her son and then at Holt, and then went back to sorting goods without saying a word. He stayed. He didn't announce it. There was no conversation about it, no negotiation, no agreement formally arrived at. He simply did not leave when the livery was shored, and then the next morning he was up before Della and working on the station floor, and the morning after that he was replacing the south wall framing. He slept in the livery, which he'd made habitable enough, and he ate what Della made and didn't thank her with words, but thanked her with the kind of attention that is better than words. He noticed things. He brought in wood before she needed to ask. He checked the cellar hatch twice after a second squall came through. Lighter. Nothing serious. He rigged a canvas shade over Fenn's chair so the boy could sit in the livery doorway without the afternoon sun in his eyes. Della watched all of it with that composed attention of hers, and she said very little. I came by each day, ostensibly to help with the rebuilding, genuinely to watch. I am not ashamed to admit it. There was something happening between those two people that had no name yet, and it was the most interesting thing I had seen in 31 years of county surveying. On the 4th day, the circuit engineer arrived with his crew and restrung the telegraph line. On the 5th day, Fenn was up on one leg and hopping to the key, tapping out a test relay to Gundel, and when Gundel tapped back clean, he let out a whoop that startled the horses. Holt was on the roof when it happened. He stopped what he was doing and looked down through the new skylight gap, and there was something in his face that I can only describe as an emotion. He didn't expect to have a pleasure in a boy's pleasure, warm and unguarded, and there, before he could put his careful face back on. Della, who was below him, looked up at the same moment and saw it. She didn't say anything. She went back to her work, but I saw the corner of her mouth. On the 8th day, she brought him coffee at the end of the evening, not at the livery, but at the front step of the rebuilt station frame, where he'd been sitting looking at the work done and the work remaining. She sat down beside him, not close, just beside him. They sat for a while without talking. The plain was still in the evening, the sky a clean dark blue, the first stars coming in over the eastern ridge. "You had a ranch," she said finally. "Verrado County, about 300 acres, good grass. And you've been driving cattle since." "8 years." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a long time to be moving." "It is." "Is it what you want to keep doing?" He looked at her. Not startled, more like a man who had been waiting for a question he didn't know was coming and now recognizes it. "I don't know what I want," he said, which was the most honest thing I'd ever heard a man say. "That's honest at least," she said. "You're a direct woman. I've been running this station alone for 3 years. I don't have time for the other kind." He almost smiled, almost. "What kind of answer are you looking for?" "I'm not looking for any particular answer," she said. "I'm looking for the true one." He was quiet for a long time. The stars were fully in by now, and the plain was dark and still, and the rebuilt station frame smelled of fresh cedar and clean air. "I came south when I should have gone north," he said finally, "and I've been sitting here trying to account for that." "Have you accounted for it?" "Not completely." "All right," she said, and stood up and took the empty coffee cups inside. He didn't leave. I want to be clear about what I mean when I say that. I don't mean he simply continued the rebuilding work, though he did that. I mean that each morning he was still there, and each evening he was at the station, and somewhere in the second week, the arrangement stopped being an arrangement and became something else, something that didn't have a word on it yet, but that Fen could feel, because children feel these things before adults admit them. "Mr. Holt," Fen said one afternoon, from his chair in the livery. The knee was better. The doctor from Aldenmere had come through on day 6 and confirmed it was a deep sprain, not a break. Fen was to stay off it 2 more weeks. He was complying, more or less. "What?" Holt said, from somewhere inside the station wall. "Are you going to keep living in the livery?" A pause. I hadn't thought much past the south wall. "Because I think there's a better room situation if you're planning to stay." Della's voice came from the far side of the station. "Fen. I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." Fen subsided, but with the particular expression of a boy who believes he has identified the obvious and is simply waiting for the adults to catch up. Holt appeared in the livery doorway. He was dusty from the wall work, and he looked at Fen with something between amusement and something older. The careful look of a man who is being asked a question he has been asking himself. "Your ma decide things for herself," he said. "That's how it works." "I know," Fen said. "I'm telling you to ask her." Holt looked at him for a long moment. Then he went back inside without saying anything. Fen looked at me across the livery. I shrugged. "Give him a minute," I said. The conversation they had, I did not witness. I only know what Della told me later in pieces. She was tallying the salvage inventory at the rebuilt station desk. The key was running again. The dry goods trade was limping back, when Holt came in and stood across the desk from her, and did not say anything for a moment. "Fen talked to you," she said without looking up. "He did. He's 9 years old. He's got good sense for 9. She looked up then. "Holt. I know you don't need me here," he said. "You ran this place alone for 3 years. You'd have rebuilt it without me and you'd have done it fine." "That's true. So I'm not telling you that you need me." She waited. "I'm telling you," he said carefully, like a man choosing words he hasn't had occasion to use in a long time, "that I'd like to stay, not for the roof, not for the station, because of you. Because of the boy." He stopped, and then he said it plain. "Because this is the first place in 8 years that I've been somewhere and not felt the immediate need to be somewhere else." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your wife, your daughter. I'm not asking you to replace them. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are." "What am I?" He looked at her steadily. "The woman I rode south for," he said. "I don't know another way to say it. Della Prine, a woman who had buried her husband and kept his station, running on composure and stubbornness alone for 3 years, put her pencil down on the ledger. "All right," she said. Not swept away, not undone, just a woman making a clear-eyed decision. "All right," she said again. "You stay." He did. That winter, with the station fully rebuilt and the telegraph line solid, Holt moved out of the livery and into the room at the back of the station house. There was a courthouse wedding in December, small, with myself and Hedda as witnesses and Finn standing beside Holt with his knee fully healed, wearing his good jacket and a serious expression. Della wore blue. Holt wore his best shirt and looked like a man who could not entirely believe his own luck, which I found, in a big quiet man like him, deeply human. Finn started calling him Holt. Not father, not pa, just Holt, which seemed right, and which Holt seemed to understand was the particular kind of trust a boy extends when he's done the math and decided a man is worth it. The cattle operation they built together was modest at first. 20 head the first spring, then 50, then a proper herd by the third year. Della kept the telegraph station and the dry goods trade, and she kept the books with the same quiet precision she'd always had, and Holt handled the cattle with the knowledge of a man who'd done it all his life and was doing it now for something other than wages. I watched them from across the road, the way I'd watched Della for 3 years, but differently now. Before, I'd watched her the way you watch something under pressure, wondering when it will give. Now I watched the way you watch something that has found its right shape and is simply living in it. The station lamp burned yellow in the evenings. There was a horse in the livery that was Holt's and one that was Della's and one that was Finn's when he turned 12, and Holt decided he was old enough for a real horse. The telegraph key ran steady. The dry goods trade recovered, then grew. And Holt Casson, who had ridden 8 years moving from one range to the next, carrying a grief so old it had become part of his weather, stopped moving. I'm 64 years old now, and I've surveyed most of the Cordon Flats corridor, and I can tell you that the land changes and the buildings change and the people come and go, and most of what I've measured and staked and recorded is already replaced by something newer. That's how the plane works. It doesn't hold. But some things hold. The night I remember best from that whole season is not the day of the storm, and it's not the courthouse wedding. It's an ordinary evening, maybe 2 months after Holt moved into the station house, late November, frost on the road, the sky clear and cold. I came home from a late survey run and rode past Prine Station in the dark, and the lamp was in the window, and through the glass I could see the 3 of them at the table, Holt and Della and Finn. The boy was talking, you could tell by the way his hands moved, and Holt was listening with his full attention, the way that big, quiet man listened when something mattered to him. Della had her hands around a cup, and she was looking at Holt with the kind of look that doesn't announce itself, doesn't perform, the kind that a woman gives when she has decided that what she sees is exactly what she wanted to see. I didn't stop. I just rode past, and the lamp light went behind me, and the plain was dark and still and cold. But I thought, that's a home, built from wreckage, built from a man who rode south when everything pointed north, and a woman who kept her station standing through 3 years of nothing, and then through the worst thing the sky could throw at it. That's a home, and it holds.